morning, and welcome to the final day of National Consumer Protection Week here at the Delaware Department of Justice. My name is Luke Meyer, and I will be your moderator for today's session. I want to thank you for tuning in to our 9th installment of our 10-part series of the top 10 scams that affect Delawareans. Today, during this session, we'll be talking about privacy, data security, and cyber threat scams. Here to talk about these type of scams, we have two speakers. We have John Steiger, who is the Regional Director of the Eastern Central Region of the Federal Trade Commission. This region oversees Delaware and 7 other states. Additionally, we have our Director of the Consumer Protection Unit, Marion Quirk. Between the two of them, they will be discussing what these scams are, how they affect Delawareans, and what you at home can do to try to avoid these scams. Now, before we dive into this topic, I want to remind you at home that if you have any questions throughout the course of the discussion, please put your questions in the comment section of the Facebook Live. I'll be keeping an eye out, and if we have time at the end, I will ask our panelists to answer some of your questions. Now, without further ado, John, if you wouldn't mind getting us started.
Sure. Thank you very much, Luke, and thank you very much to Marion, too, for setting up these sessions and for inviting me to participate in this one. As Luke said, I am the Director of the East Central Region of the Federal Trade Commission, and we have a particular role in dealing with privacy, data security, and cyber threats. But in general, let me just say that we are the nation's Consumer Protection Agency. We're a federal agency. We bring law enforcement, and we also do consumer and business education events like this one, in fact. And we are a place where reports of fraud, we collect reports of fraud so that law enforcement from the local level, the state level, national, and even international can take a look at these reports. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So we have, particular to the data security area, we have a law enforcement role in making sure that legitimate companies follow their privacy policies. If you're dealing with a company and they say they're going to do X, Y, and Z to keep your information safe, we help make sure that they follow those promises. We have a law enforcement role in making sure that legitimate companies follow really basic data security practices. So, for example, when Twitter first came on board, they did not have a good password protection policy in place. Anyone could just go in and, using a simple dictionary word, get access to everyone's account. This was at the beginning, not now. But we went ahead and sued Twitter because of that. So that's one example. And we have a law enforcement role against bad guys using phishing schemes to get your personal information. And then we also have, we provide education on tools that you and your families and friends can use to protect yourselves from scams, phishing, or other forms of identity theft. So let me talk a little bit about phishing. And I think probably all of you know what this is, but just to make sure, and so that you can help share this information with your friends and family, I'm talking really about attempts to get your information or to get money from you by the bad guy pretending to be someone reaching out specifically to you. So, what does that mean? That could be an email from your bank, or from, I should say, someone pretending to be your bank, saying that there's a problem with your account. It could be a phone call from someone saying that it's the Social Security Administration and there's a problem with your Social Security number that they need to help you fix. And so on the one hand, I think a lot of us are very familiar with the idea that there are scammers out there trying to get our money. But what a lot of people don't know, and what would be really helpful if you shared with your friends and family, is that a lot of times they're not trying to get money, they're trying to get information out of you. And although we might be on guard against giving someone our bank account information, maybe we won't be as on guard if someone asks for our birthday, or if someone asks for our Social Security number, even the last 4 digits of the Social Security number. But even beyond sensitive information like that, there are ways that the bad guys are getting money off of interacting with you. So for example, if you get a telephone call and you answer the telephone call, even if you never provide them with your social security number or with a bank account number, they can still make money off of you. Because what they do is they say, okay, this phone number, 555-1234, was answered by a male. And they take that information and they can sell that to other people who would want to know, okay, this is an active telephone number and there is at least one male who lives at that home where that phone number is. And the more information that you give them when you're interacting, the more money they can make. So I'll talk a little bit about this later, but that's one of the reasons why we say you should never, press 1 or tell someone that you want to be put on their do not call list if you get a call out of the blue, because anytime you interact with them, you're actually helping the bad guys, and likely you will get more calls as a result. Another thing that I want to talk about is on the email side of things. And here's where phishing, like I said, could be, seems like you got an email from your bank and they want you to click on a link in order to log in or to deal with what they say is a problem. Or it could be an email that you get that has an attachment that says, hey, check out this great video. Click on this attachment. And the important thing to know with that, the simple rule is never click on a link, never click on an attachment in an email if you don't know exactly where it came from. I would say never do it at all. And if, for example, you get that email from your bank and it says there's a problem, you have to click on this link, what I would do is I would go to the information that I know is really from my bank. I would go to my bank statement, or I do some online banking. So I would log in the way that I know how to log in, and then deal with it that way. Because chances are good that that email, although it looks like it's from your bank and they might have the graphics from your bank, it's probably a phishing scam and they're trying to get you to click on a link. So what happens when you click on that link or you click on that attachment? Well, if it is from a bad guy, they're probably putting a program on your computer or on your phone. And that program could do anything once it's in there. It can harvest your contact information and scam all of your friends. It can figure out what you're typing in and get all your passwords. It can go onto your online banking if you do online banking and actually take your money that way. So there's all sorts of things that of dangerous things that can happen when you click on that link or click on that attachment. And this is a discussion that I have with my mom all the time as I give her this advice. And she'll say to me, okay, I got this YouTube video as an attachment, and it's an email from a friend of mine. So that's okay, right? And I explained to her, okay, you got that email from a friend, but where did your friend get it from? Where did that person get it from? And you start to think about it, you realize that at some point, someone put this movie file on an email and put it out into the internet, and you have no idea who that was. And even if it shows a video, the bad guys are so good at this, they can make it show a video and put the bad software on your phone or on your computer. So even if it's coming in from a friend, if it's an attachment of any kind, if it's a link on any kind, don't click on that. Go, if it's YouTube, go onto YouTube yourself and search for the video that way. And that way you can protect yourself, but also, like I said, your friends who might get scammed because they're showing up on the computer. I want to just take a quick moment more before introducing Marion to talk about robocalls. And of course, this is something that we all face. I get these calls as well, and I know how frustrating it really is. And it's so cheap for the bad guys to use robocalls these days that if they can either get a person to pay money or turn over sensitive information, even if it's just 1 in a million, they can make money because they just have computers sending out these calls all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So literally, if they get a 1 in a million hit, they're going to keep going and make money. So one important tip here is that you can't trust caller identification. You can't trust the caller ID that comes up. It is illegal to change your caller ID, but these are bad guys, so they don't care about what's illegal. We at the Federal Trade Commission and other law enforcement, we're going after these operations all the time, but the best thing we can do is protect ourselves from the beginning. So the two things I would say there are to put yourself on the Do Not Call registry. It's not going to stop the illegal robocallers, but it will help you know that if you're getting a call and you're on the registry, that likely that's someone who doesn't care about the law. And so you don't want to have any dealings with them. And secondly, if you don't answer a telephone call that you don't know. And if you do answer it and you realize that it's a robocall, just hang up. Don't press 1. Don't ask to talk to someone. Just hang up right away. So that's sort of an overview of some of the areas that we see and some of the things that you can watch out for and you can tell your friends about. Marion, I'm going to turn it over to you now and take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was very informative. I know one of the things I have trouble with my friends and family, particularly my parents, is not answering the phone. You come from a different age when you always would pick up the phone, and it's almost rude not to. So it does take some education to let people know what the impact is of just answering the phone. So that was really helpful. I'd like to talk today about tech scams and public Wi-Fi scams. And before I get started, I'm going to state the obvious here, but it's more prevalent than ever in the pandemic because we are all using our computers to do, work or teach or school for our children or ourselves. And so we are in a panic, frankly, if we get some sort of notification that our device there's some problem with it, a technical problem or otherwise. And the scammers are taking advantage of that. So there's a few common tech scams that I'll talk about. One is completely unsolicited call. As John mentioned, you'll see on your caller ID that it says Apple, it says Microsoft, because they've spoofed the number, and that's illegal, but they've done it. So it feels legitimate, and you answer it. And then they tell you that there's a technological problem, like you have a virus on your computer, needs to be addressed right away, and they want to get remote access to your computer. So you do that, if you don't hang up, and we'd like you to just hang up or not answer the phone, but assuming you take those steps, then what the scam is, they pretend to do a diagnostic test. They could install malware, as John mentioned, and create a whole host of problems and take your personal information. But they could run a diagnostic test and ultimately tell you have a problem that you need to pay to fix. And they may say you have to upgrade your software, sign up for some program to make sure your computer is protected, and they're scamming you and taking your money. No legitimate software or tech company is going to cold call you and tell you of a computer problem. It is an incredible red flag. So don't answer those phone calls. And if you hear about a computer problem, please go to a trusted source, not somebody that's cold called you or tried to reach out to you by text. And you can also run your own computer security scans to see if you have a problem, or call a trusted or contact a trusted source, not a scammer, because this is happening all of the time. And as I mentioned before, we're so susceptible to this. I know personally, I've had work and my kids on Zoom, and so if somebody calls and tells me I have a technical problem, you feel the pressure of what that would mean if your computer goes down or you don't have access for some reason. Another common tech scam is you're just working away on your computer or your device and you get a pop-up, and that pop-up says you have a virus, you urgently need to contact a number. And it's similar to the scam that I just talked about with the unwanted call. There's an urgent need to fix something. They get access, they want to get access, they remote into your computer, and they're doing the same thing. They're scamming you by either putting malware, some problem on your computer, or convincing you have a problem that you need to pay them to solve, and they're taking your money. And this is happening all of the time. So the incredible red flags in terms of payment, or if somebody asks you to pay by way of wire transfer, Bitcoin, gift cards, those are real red flags that, if you haven't stopped yet, before you make the payment would be a time to pause and, don't fall for the scam. No legitimate company is going to send you a warning via a pop-up for a security problem, but it's so common that people get panicked and don't take time to take a moment, take a break. They, call the number, and then there you go, that the scammer gets the information and gets money from you, and it's very hard to get the money back from them. And they may have ultimately impacted your computer system, which would be terrible. So I do urge you to be mindful of these scams. And like I said before, contact a trusted source to help you if you need assistance with a computer problem. Another area where we commonly see scams is just public Wi-Fi networks. They're not always very secure. We all do it. I know I do it. It's not going to use your data. It's easy to just sign in, whether you're at the airport, train station, although many of us aren't traveling. So it's maybe more likely a Starbucks or something like that. And the networks are not always very secure. So that gives the scammers the opportunity to get in the network and see what you're doing. So please don't do any online banking on a public Wi-Fi network. People do it, and then you find that you've been scammed and your information is compromised. And people do obviously a lot of online shopping too. And that's a situation where, the scammer can take your credit card information, get passwords, and really impact you, maybe steal your identity. It's a real problem. Another thing that you need to be mindful of with the public networks, the Wi-Fi networks, is the scammer will use a name that's oh so similar to the legitimate one. And they may change a number, a letter. And when you're going quick, you might not realize there's two of them, and you click on the wrong one, and then you're into the network of the scammer, essentially. So a tip to avoid that to the extent possible is to try to find out the legitimate name of the Wi-Fi network you're needing to use. It's a little bit easier, I think, if you're in a store to ask a clerk or somebody else that works there and get that written down and make sure you're using that. And particularly if you see two networks that look very similar, confirm that it's the legitimate one before you click on it. And try to avoid doing the online banking and the shopping on those networks, the public Wi-Fi networks. It's harmless to check essentially the weather and do news and the like, but it gets incredibly problematic to do particularly the online banking. Now, if you're able to use a public network and use VPN, that's an added security that's helpful. But I do urge folks the online banking is really something that we see people doing, and then ultimately they get scammed and their information is compromised. And once the money's out of your account, I think there are stories where you're able to get the money back, but those are few and far between. So I just urge folks to be very mindful. Luke, have we received any questions through the chat yet?
We have not. So if you do have questions, feel free to submit them, but I have written down some questions throughout the discussion to ask the two of you. So to start with John, could you provide some consumer tips that you would want viewers at home to take away from this discussion?
Yeah. So the first is, like I said, if you're getting a call and it's not a phone number that you recognize, even if it's one that looks similar to one or familiar because it's a local call, if you don't actually recognize the phone number, best thing is just to not answer it. Let it go to voicemail. If it's a legitimate call, they'll leave you a message. You can call them right back. That's not a problem. And be particularly on the alert for caller ID that appears to be from a government. There was just reports, I think yesterday or the day before, about a whole bunch of calls that went out that the caller ID said it was from the Drug Enforcement Agency. And you know, it's meant to scare people, but it wasn't. These were bad guys that were just faking it. One other tip with the emails, I was talking about the emails, the phishing emails that seem like they're from your bank or a government agency. One tip that we offer to help you figure out whether it's legitimate is what we call Mouseover. So if you're on your computer and you're on the email and you move the cursor so that it's just over the link that they want you to click on, and just leave it there. Don't click, just leave the cursor over that. You'll see in the bottom of the screen that it will actually show you the web address that that link will take you to. So if I get an email from, you know, National Bank, and it says, click here because you have a security issue, and it looks like it's a National Bank link, if I put the mouse cursor over that, don't click and just let it be for a second, I'll see in the bottom, usually bottom left of the screen, it'll either say nationalbank.com if it's a legitimate email, but it also could say, you know, a whole bunch of characters, and maybe it's coming out of Russia, and it'll say, you know, .ru, or it'll say .something else altogether. That shows you that it's not going to the place that it pretends to be, and you should just delete that right away. And then one other tip that I'll give, and it applies in this area and it applies to a bunch of other areas too, and that is to consider putting a credit freeze on your credit account. And what this does is this prevents anyone from opening up an account like a credit card account or bank account in your name using your social security number. Now there is a disadvantage. The disadvantage is that it prevents everyone from doing that, which means it prevents you from doing that too. But if you're the kind of person that isn't opening up new credit cards or opening up, you know, it also would apply to leasing a car or something like that, then might as well freeze your account, because then you know that nobody can be opening up an account in your name. And the great thing is that it's free to put the freeze on. It's also free to lift it. So if you do go to lease a car, you can just find out from the company, which credit reporting company do you use? TransUnion? Okay, I'll lift my credit freeze from TransUnion for the day. You can do the lease paperwork, and then it goes back on and you're protected again. So those are a couple of tips I would offer up.
Thank you, John. Now, Marion, the same question for you. What are some tips that you would provide to consumers?
I want to emphasize a few things that I said before. One of which is, don't let somebody you don't know gain access to your computer. Just so much damage can happen when somebody gets remote access. Obviously, there's legitimate reasons to do that, you know, if you know the person, but the examples that we were mentioning are just a few, but that can cause so many problems. So with unsolicited texts or emails, do not allow somebody to get remote access to your computer. I think that's really important to remember. And also we've said it today, but it doesn't, I think it bears repeating, that the spoofing happens all of the time. And I think people don't realize that it's a thing, like it's not legitimate. It's, you know, caller ID is not true. It doesn't mean it's that particular caller. And so we're all learning that. I think depending upon how old you are, you may be more trusting of a caller ID. And so it's really just important to, remember that when you see a call coming, and a lot of times it's your own area code as well. And so you might think, oh, it's the Apple store or whatever contacting me. And like I said before, that, those companies are not going to be cold calling you and letting you know there are computer problems. And the last thing I'll share is to really make sure that you are not clicking on pop-ups and links, as John said as well. But even, I didn't go through all the text scams, but there are ones that come through by way of, links to click on as well that could create problems. And so do not click on anything that's not a trusted source. And I think John said, really don't click on anything unless you know where it came from.
Great, thank you, Marion. John, another question for you. Is there anything businesses should be aware of in terms of phishing?
Yeah, we've been talking mainly about these risks to individuals, but pretty much all of these risks also apply to businesses. So whether you work at a business or own a business, it's really helpful for you to be aware of these. There's a whole subcategory of data threats called the business email compromise. And we've seen a lot of these. And unfortunately, they can be very, very sophisticated. So for example, I just got an email this past week from a relative of mine who's a lawyer, and someone had broken into his system and sent out an email to every one of his contacts, of this law firm's contacts, saying, I have information about the PPP loan, one of the stimulus programs, and click here in this Dropbox so you can see about your loan. Well, luckily I work where I work and I know about these issues, but I'm sure that there were a lot of his clients that didn't know and might have clicked on that link, which probably then opened up their contacts to further scamming. So just as much as you do on an individual level, when you're at work or when you're thinking about educating your employees if you own a business, make sure that this is a part of it, that they're aware of phishing emails and phone calls that might seem like they're coming from internal, but to always put in an extra level of security. And an extra level of technological security is great, but even beyond that, an extra level of making sure your employees are aware of these scams so that they don't just click on something and put your business at risk.
Great, thank you, John. I think we have time for one more question. So Marion, how can you spot a tech support scam?
Many ways. A few of them, it's the unsolicited call or text that you receive. That is, or by email, that's a sure sign of a scam, because as I said, legitimate companies are just not contacting you that way and not asking you to call a 1-800 number to address a tech scam that you've, a technological problem that you've had with, or they claim you have with your computer. And the other super red flag for any scam, frankly, is when somebody asks you to pay them in a means that is like Bitcoin. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it does happen. By Bitcoin or the gift cards or to wire money. They may claim that they're calling from overseas and the only means for them to get the money is for you to wire it to them. That's, many red flags in what I've said in terms of, being in another country, but wiring money, it's gone. And so, along the way in the conversation, as I mentioned, if you're having that and you're not seeing red flags, to pause certainly before you make a payment, particularly by way of a wire transfer.
Thank you, Marion. And I want to thank all the viewers for tuning in today. And I want to give a special thanks to John and the FTC for joining us today and helping throughout the course of National Consumer Protection Week. I want to remind the viewers that if you missed something throughout the course of the discussion or you want to rewatch this discussion, the video will remain on our Facebook page for you to rewatch at any time. I also want to let you know that we will be having a Twitter recap at 4 p.m. this afternoon on our Twitter page. If you follow us at DE_DOJ, you will see the Twitter recap at 4 p.m. And I also want to let you know that we will be having our last installment of the 10-part series of the top 10 scams at 2 p.m. today, where Marion will join us, as well as another Deputy Attorney General, Jordan Bronsberg, will join us to talk about travel, vacation, and timeshare scams. Thank you again for joining us, and please stay safe.